I once thought I was a fortunate woman. At 57, I had a complete family, a brilliant career, and a magnificent villa that made anyone passing by stop and stare. I believed I had everything under control: my company, my employees, even the happiness within my home. But then, in just one moment, everything shattered. A mysterious USB, a horrifying clip, and I saw my husband in the arms of another woman. I screamed, furious, ready to cast the traitor out of my life. Yet at that very moment, I discovered, behind it all was a sinister scheme. A trap carefully set to destroy me and the company I had spent my life building. From then on, the house that had once been a peaceful haven turned into a battlefield. The husband who once fought by my side became a weak man under manipulation. A stranger appeared, hiding her malice behind a flawless mask. And in the shadows, an old enemy sneered, waiting for the day we collapsed. But there was one thing he never expected. At the very moment my family seemed most broken, we learned how to rise together. And I, Victoria Hale, will tell you what truly happened behind those seemingly tranquil doors. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd be so happy to connect with you. I am Victoria Hale, 57 years old, CEO of medical tech company I have devoted my entire life to building. People often assume that a woman like me must live under constant pressure and in loneliness. But no, I have a family, and this villa stands as proof of what I have worked so hard to achieve. Each morning, sunlight streams through the wide glass windows, illuminating the living room filled with the luxurious pieces I once chose with such care. I usually sit on the ivory sofa, sipping a strong cup of coffee while reading company reports. Beside me is the man who has accompanied me for nearly 30 years of my life, Charles. My husband, Charles, retired early. He was once a sharp, ambitious financial expert. But as I climbed to the peak of my career, he chose to step back, devoting the rest of his life to tranquility. Sometimes, watching him sit in the garden with a book or leisurely tend to his plants gave me both comfort and a hint of emptiness. "You stayed up late again?" Charles would often remind me in the mornings, noticing the faint shadows under my eyes. I would smile. "Work, Charles. I'm used to it." He would nod gently, a flicker of worry in his eyes quickly hidden away. In this house, my greatest pride has never been wealth or career, but our children, especially Rebecca, our firstborn. At 32, she is a brilliant lawyer, intelligent and rational. I have always felt that Rebecca resembles me more than anyone else in her decisiveness, in her way of seeing things from many angles, and in her smile that sometimes conceals the fire within. "Mom, I just won another big case. Did you see the news?" Rebecca once called just to share her triumphant laughter. I answered, both proud and stern, "I saw it. But remember, victory is not for boasting. It's a door opening to the next step in your career." Rebecca laughed aloud. "Mom, you never forget to lecture." Perhaps that is what I love most about my daughter, her strength. While Charles chose a gentler life, Rebecca carries the blood of a fighter. Sometimes I think, when I am gone, it will be Rebecca who shoulders the great responsibilities I leave behind. That afternoon, just as I returned from a business trip, Rebecca was already waiting at the steps. "Mom, I just finished preparing the files for a land dispute case. Exhausting." I pulled her into my arms and smiled softly. "You did well, but remember to rest. Even the best need to know their limits." Rebecca's voice, Charles's gentle chuckle from the living room, and the sunlight spilling across the polished stone floor, all of it made me feel as if I were living inside a perfect painting. But perhaps it was this very perfection that sent a shiver through me. Since when had I begun to feel uneasy whenever I stepped into this vast house and heard nothing but the wind sweeping through the halls? Beyond Rebecca, I have two more children, each with their own colors, completing the portrait of family I have always believed to be whole. Nathan, my second son, 28 years old, works at a financial firm in another city. He rarely comes home, but whenever he does, he brings with him a burst of liveliness. Nathan has a carefree nature, sometimes a little careless, but I know that's only if awayed. Deep inside, he is still the same little boy who once ran around this garden, or clumsily folded bills into my hand, telling me it was his savings so Mom could buy a new dress. "You're too busy to come home for New Year again?" I asked over the phone, my voice tinged with reproach. On the other end, Nathan laughed. "Mom, I'll make arrangements. But you know how my job is. Always unpredictable." I sighed. "All right, as long as you take care of yourself." The call ended, and the room sank back into that heavy silence only I seemed to feel. And then there is Isabella, my youngest daughter, 24. Unlike her siblings, Isabella chose the path of art, pursuing a master's degree in painting. She often came home with paint still on her hands, her bright eyes sparkling as if they held an entire world inside. I adore that innocence, but I also worry. In a family ruled by calculations, rules, and numbers, Isabella is like a stray note drifting out of tune. One evening, I stepped into her room. On the easel stood an unfinished painting, a grand house standing alone in a storm. "What are you trying to paint, Isabella?" I asked. She turned, smiling softly. "I just paint what I feel. Sometimes, even our own home feels like it's standing in the middle of a storm. Don't you think so, Mom?" I froze for a moment. "It's just a painting, sweetheart. Our home is still peaceful." Isabella smiled, but her gaze drifted far away. That night, I sat in my study, staring out the window into the quiet garden. Everything seemed perfect. My husband reading leisurely, my eldest daughter shining in her career, my son busy with his future, my youngest immersed in colors. A dream family, isn't it? And yet, deep inside, I couldn't understand why I felt something creeping in, silently unraveling the very things I believed in, as if within these solid walls lay a tiny crack, waiting for a cold wind to blow through and split it wide open at any moment. I reassured myself, everything is still under control. It has to be. But even then, my hands trembled slightly, though no one could see. Her name was Sabrina Cole, 30 years old, slender, with wavy brown hair always neatly tied back, and a refined face that made anyone feel at ease upon first meeting her. Sabrina had been working as the manager of our villa for over a year. She handled everything from meal plans and supervising the staff, to managing even the smallest expenses. I had to admit, when it came to her work, Sabrina was remarkably skillful. One afternoon, just as I returned from the company, I caught sight of Charles chatting with her in the living room. "I feel lucky to have Sabrina here," Charles said proudly. "She's like my right hand." I stepped in, smiling politely. "Is that so? Good. A big house needs someone trustworthy." Sabrina lowered her head, her voice sweet as honey. "Mrs. Hale, I'm only doing my duty. Your husband is always too kind with his praise." Sometimes, such polite words made my skin crawl. I glanced at Rebecca, who was standing on the staircase, arms crossed. In her eyes, I caught a flicker of suspicion. After dinner that evening, Rebecca pulled me aside and whispered, "Mom, I don't like the way she looks at Dad." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Rebecca lowered her voice, almost breathing into my ear. "To intimate. Too natural. Not the way a staff member should look at her employer." I stayed silent. At my age, I had met hundreds of different kinds of people, but Sabrina, she moved with the grace of a cat, spoke softly, and always made any objection seem groundless. Another day, when I entered the kitchen, I found Sabrina giving instructions to the staff. She was organizing meals for each member of the family, carefully noting everyone's preferences. When she saw me, she immediately smiled just enough, neither too much nor too little. "Would you like to switch to a low-carb menu, Mrs. Hale? I've noticed you're always busy with work, and maintaining your health would be better." I froze for a moment. How did she know I had just gone for a checkup last week, where the doctor had said the very same thing? I nodded slightly. You're very thoughtful. Sabrina tilted her head, her gentle smile lingering. But in her eyes, something indescribable flickered. That same day, I overheard Charles speaking on the phone in the library. His voice was low, but I clearly heard the name Sabrina. When I walked in, he startled and stammered. I was just discussing some work with her. Nothing else. I said nothing, only looked at him for a long moment, then walked away. At dinner, Rebecca kept her eyes fixed on Sabrina. The woman behaved impeccably, pouring wine for Charles, asking Isabella about her classes, even cracking subtle jokes that made Nathan laugh when he came home for a visit. The table rang with chatter and laughter. Only Rebecca and I remained silent when Sabrina rose and said politely, "Excuse me, Mrs. Hale. I'll check the kitchen before everyone rests." I caught the sharp, blade-like look in Rebecca's eyes as she watched her leave. Rebecca leaned close to my ear. "Mom, don't let that sweet demeanor fool you. I don't believe anyone is that devoted to their job." I nodded slightly, but inside I told myself, maybe she's just suspicious. Or maybe she sees what I've been trying to ignore. After dinner, when everyone dispersed, Rebecca quietly joined me in the hallway. She watched Sabrina's figure disappear toward the kitchen, her eyes cold. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't trust that smile." I frowned. "You're being too sensitive. A household manager is supposed to smile warmly. It's normal." Rebecca shook her head. "No, don't you see? That's not a polite smile. It's the smile of someone who knows too much." I sighed and said nothing. Years of running a company had taught me not to conclude anything without evidence. Yet Rebecca's eyes made me falter. In the living room, Nathan was hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't even glance up when Sabrina walked by. "Mom, I have to finish this report before my boss sends it off tomorrow morning," Nathan called out, utterly detached from the tension in the air. Isabella, meanwhile, was different. She lounged on a chair, sketching quickly in her notebook. When I asked, "Doesn't this seem strange to you?" she only shrugged and smiled faintly. "People always overthink. To me, every smile is beautiful. That's all." Rebecca glared at her sister, frustrated. "That's exactly why you're so careless." I raised my hand to stop her. "Enough. No need to argue." Nathan and Isabella were both wrapped up in their own worlds, blind to Sabrina's subtle presence. Meanwhile, Charles grew more dependent on her with each passing day. Whenever he needed something, he didn't call the longtime butler, he sought Sabrina. He praised her in front of me, in front of the children, even boasting to his friends that this house only runs smoothly because of Sabrina. Later that night, after the family had gone to their rooms, I went downstairs for a glass of water. The hallway lights glowed dimly. I froze when I heard whispering from the dark corner near the back door. It was Sabrina's voice, low, but unmistakably clear. "Gregory, I'm ready." "No, they don't suspect a thing. Charles trusts me completely." "Yes, I'll follow the plan exactly." I stood paralyzed. Her shadow stretched across the wall, one hand clutching a phone, the other gripping the edge of her blouse. The sweet voice she used by day had turned into a venomous hiss. I took a step back, my heart pounding, careful not to make a sound. When Sabrina hung up, she lifted her head, her dagger-sharp eyes sweeping across the darkened hall. I slipped behind the door, holding my breath. In that moment, I understood. The unease I had felt all along had not been without reason. That night, the villa's lights burned later than usual. I was still at the office handling paperwork, while Charles was at home. Even now, when I look back, I still wonder, if only I had returned earlier that evening, would things have been different? In the vast living room, Sabrina had set out a tray of red wine. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier. Tilting the bottle gracefully, she poured, her voice sweet as honey. "Just one glass, Mr. Hale." Relax. You've had such a long, tiring day. Charles leaned back on the sofa, his tie loosened, face flushed. He had already drunk a few glasses earlier, yet he couldn't resist. Yeah, just one more, he mumbled, his hand trembling as he accepted the glass from Sabrina. Sabrina sat down beside him, leaning just enough to reveal the pale curve of her shoulder under the light. She raised her glass, gently clinking it against his. To trust, she whispered, her eyes fixed on him. Charles gave a strained smile and drained the glass. His eyes grew heavy, his voice weaker. You're very thoughtful, Sabrina. Without you, I don't know what this house would be like. An observer, had there been one, would have noticed the tiny hidden camera, tucked inside the decorative cabinet in the corner. Its light blinked steadily, capturing every movement, every breath. Everything had been prepared in advance, each detail carefully orchestrated by Gregory and Sabrina. Sabrina set her glass down, inching closer. Her voice was soft as silk, yet sharp as a blade. You deserve to be cared for, Charles. Mrs. Hale is always so busy, but me, I'm always here. Charles lifted his eyes, drunk and incoherent. Victoria is always too strong. I. His words faltered when Sabrina pressed a finger against his lips, whispering, "Hush. Don't mention her now." The room seemed to sink into a misty haze. The camera continued its patient recording, every frame becoming lethal evidence. Outside the hallway, a night breeze slipped through the crack of the door, carrying the sound of rustling leaves. To anyone watching from afar, the opulent scene would reveal itself as nothing more than an invisible trap closing in, imprisoning a man too weak to resist temptation. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, striking Charles's weary face. He startled awake on the sofa, tie crooked, shirt wrinkled. The shattered wine glass from the night before still left its stain on the carpet, rubbing his eyes. He froze when Sabrina stepped out of the kitchen, neat, fresh, composed, as though nothing had happened. This, he stammered, voice trembling. Fragmented memories from the night before rushed back, sending a chill of sweat down his spine. Sabrina stopped, staring straight at him, the corner of her lips curling into a calm, terrifying smile. If you want, I'll forget everything. I'm not the type who enjoys keeping someone else's dirty little secrets. She paused, her eyes flashing. But Gregory isn't like that. Charles froze. He knew that name instantly. Gregory Vaughan, the sworn enemy of Victoria. A man ruthless enough to turn a single mistake into a noose tightening around one's neck. You recorded everything? Charles whispered, his trembling hands clutching his head. Sabrina didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled a phone from the pocket of her dress and placed it on the glass table, the screen lighting up in front of him. A blurred image appeared, a paused video, frozen at the scene of him and her sitting close together, laughing, his hand resting on her shoulder with just a single tap. That clip could spread everywhere. Charles's face went pale, his voice breaking. My God, if Victoria finds out, then... Sabrina cut him off, her tone soft as a breeze but sharp as a blade. All you need to do is follow Gregory's instructions. That's it. No one has to know, and everything will stay smooth. At that very moment, a message notification chimed. Charles fumbled to open his phone. On the screen glared a chilling line. Cooperate, or everything ends. The words stabbed straight into his heart. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into the chair. In that instant, the man who had once been a sharp financial expert was reduced to a shadow of himself, ensnared, trapped in the web Gregory and Sabrina had spun. Outside the window, the sunlight remained pure. The garden flowers still swayed gently in the breeze. But inside the villa, a dark cloud had settled, forewarning the storm about to descend on my family. One none of us yet knew was coming. I wasn't there to witness that scene myself, but later, piecing together every fragment, I could picture it as clearly as if I had been standing behind the living room door, hearing every word. That morning, Sabrina pulled a chair close to Charles. She opened her laptop. The screen lit up, and the video from the previous night began to play. The sound was low, but loud enough for Charles to see his own face in every frame. "Look at this." Sabrina pressed a key. The video froze on the image of Charles with his arm around her shoulders. She tilted her head, her voice a hiss wrapped in sugar. "Just one click, Mr. Hale. One click, and the whole city will see who you really are." Charles turned pale. He reached for the laptop, but Sabrina pulled it back with feline speed, letting out a soft laugh. "Don't be hasty. I'm not foolish enough to keep the original here. Gregory always keeps a copy." That name Gregory Vaughn made Charles's heart tighten. Gregory, the man who had lost $1 billion contract to me, who had considered the Hale family a thorn in his side ever since. Sabrina closed the laptop and sat up straight, her eyes glittering but sharp as blades. "Mr. Gregory doesn't want this video for entertainment. What he wants is someone inside medical tech. And you, Charles, are the perfect choice." Charles shook his head, sweat beading at his temples. "No, I can't. Victoria will find out. That company is her life's work. I won't." Sabrina leaned closer, whispering right into his ear loud enough for another hidden camera in the room to catch every word. "You only need to pass along small things for us, strategic reports, bits of research data. No one will ever know. But if you refuse, I'll send this clip right away." Charles trembled, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "My God," he whispered, his voice breaking. Outside, the sun had risen high, casting pale gold across the living room. But to Charles, the whole space had gone dark. He felt as though an invisible chain had just been slipped around his neck when he himself, in a moment of weakness, had allowed them to fasten. The question hammered in his mind. If Victoria finds out, she'll destroy me. But if I refuse, Gregory will destroy this whole family. Charles sat motionless, like a prisoner awaiting his sentence. He went upstairs, slamming the door behind him, and stood dazed before the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was of another man, entirely bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair, trembling lips. He touched the glass lightly and murmured like a lost soul, "My God, what am I going to do? I'm finished." The once proud shoulders of a financial expert had now shrunk in defeat. Charles knew that with just one message, one single click, his wife's career and the family's honor would all turn to ashes in the days that followed. Charles grew strangely restless. He startled easily. Sometimes, while reading, he would drop his glasses without realizing. At dinner, the mere sound of a phone notification sent cold sweat down his back, and he would rush away from the table. Rebecca quickly sensed something was wrong. One evening, she found her father standing frozen on the porch, a cigarette trembling between his fingers though he hadn't lit it. She walked over quietly. "Dad," Rebecca called softly. "What's going on? You haven't been yourself lately." Charles turned away, avoiding his daughter's eyes. He forced a weak smile. "No, it's nothing. I was just remembering some old things." Rebecca narrowed her eyes, her voice firm. "You've never been able to hide anything from me. This has something to do with Sabrina, doesn't it?" He froze, then sighed heavily before hurrying away, leaving his daughter with an ever-growing suspicion. "As for me, I still believe the household remained in order. Until one evening, while searching for an important file in my study, I discovered a thick envelope tucked carefully inside the drawer. What caught my attention wasn't the layer of dust still clinging to its cover, but the way it had been placed to deliberately hidden, not carelessly forgotten. I opened it. Inside was only a black USB stick. No label, no markings. My heart pounded hard. As the CEO of a tech company, I understood both the value and the danger of such a small object. Holding the USB in my hand, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass of the cabinet. A chill ran down my spine. Why was it here? Who had left it? And most importantly, what was inside? I closed the drawer, gripping the USB tightly. In the silence of that room, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like war drums. What I didn't know then was that moment had officially set me face to face with a brutal truth. The solid walls around my family were cracking open, revealing a conspiracy that had been meticulously laid long ago. After 3 days on a business trip at the branch headquarters, I returned to the villa one late afternoon. The large wooden door creaked as I pushed it open. The familiar scent of waxed wood drifted out, yet strangely, the house was unusually quiet. I called out loudly, "Where is everyone?" Hurried footsteps echoed from the living room. Charles appeared, his hair slightly disheveled, the top button of his shirt undone. He startled as though I had caught him in the middle of something. I was just a bit tired. I sat down waiting for you and must have dozed off. I narrowed my eyes at him. Charles had never been one to fumble for words. Slowly, I stepped further inside, my heels clicking against the stone floor. Just then, Sabrina emerged from the kitchen hallway, neat and composed in a dark, form-fitting dress. She lowered her head, her voice gentle as always. "Good evening, Mrs. Hale. Everything has been arranged. Dinner will be ready soon." I nodded, a thin smile on my lips. But inside, suspicion flickered. I couldn't explain why, but every time I saw Sabrina's serene smile, I felt like a guest in my own home. I set my handbag on the table. "Where's Rebecca?" Charles answered quickly. She just went upstairs, said she had something to look over." The living room air remained heavy. I sat down on the sofa, scanning the room. Everything was in perfect order, so perfect it felt cold. Sabrina stood not far away, her hands folded, her eyes flicking briefly toward Charles before settling back on me. Rebecca came down the stairs, saw me, and rushed over, wrapping her arms around me. "Mom, how was the trip?" I replied softly. "It was fine, but here, it feels too quiet." Rebecca frowned, then leaned close to whisper, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "I don't like this atmosphere. It feels stranger by the day." I kept my expression calm but squeezed her hand tightly. Deep inside, a cold unease seeped in. That dinner passed heavily. Charles hardly dared meet my eyes, while Sabrina maintained her graceful smile, pouring wine for him again and again. I stayed silent, but every small detail cut into me like the edge of a blade. When we rose from the table, Rebecca tugged me out to the back garden. Beneath the golden glow of the lamps, the wind stirred the trees, their leaves rustling. She gripped my hand firmly, whispering, "Mom, Dad's been acting strange. While you were away, I noticed he would flinch whenever his phone buzzed. And once, I saw him sitting in the library, his hands were trembling." I frowned. "Are you certain?" Rebecca nodded firmly. "I don't have proof yet, but my instincts have never been wrong. I think it has something to do with Sabrina." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, steadying myself. "All right, I'll look into it myself." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went into my study. The cabinet drawer was still locked, but I remembered the strange envelope I had once discovered. I searched, and there it was again, the black USB, lying neatly as though it had been waiting for me. My hands trembled as I plugged it into the computer. The screen lit up, and seconds later, the video appeared. The first image froze me in place. Charles, my husband, sitting beside Sabrina on the sofa. His smile was strained, his arm draped around her shoulders. Sabrina leaned in, pouring wine, her eyes fixed on him with the predatory gaze of a hunter. My heart pounded, each beat thundering in my ears. I could not believe my eyes. The man who had walked beside me through 30 years of marriage, the man who once swore his vows before God, was now there, in this filthy recording. "No, impossible," I whispered, tears spilling down before I even realized. My trembling hand knocked over the crystal glass on the table. It crashed to the floor, shattering into sharp echoes that tore through the night. I collapsed onto the chair, My eyes locked on the screen, on Sabrina's triumphant smile, and on Charles's face, hollow, like a man who had already lost everything. In the silent darkness of that room, I heard my own ragged breaths, broken and uneven. It felt as though the walls of safety I had built around my family for so many years had just crumbled before my very eyes. I collapsed into the chair, tears still wet on my cheeks. The video frozen on the frame of Charles with his arm around Sabrina. The humiliation surged up my throat, choking me, until I could no longer remain still. I shot to my feet, my voice erupting, echoing through the vast living room. Sabrina, get up here, now. Hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. Moments later, Sabrina appeared, her calm demeanor betraying not the slightest surprise. She lowered her head politely. You called for me? Blood rushed to my face. I could no longer restrain myself. I lunged forward, my hand striking her cheek with a fiery slap. The sharp crack echoed across the room. Viper, get out of my house. Sabrina staggered but quickly regained her balance. On her face, the feigned look of fear faltered for an instant, and in her eyes glimmered a defiant, unsettling challenge. At that very moment, Charles rushed out from the library, pale as a ghost. Trembling, he reached out as if to beg. Victoria, don't do this. I spun toward him, my eyes blazing. You still dare to speak? After everything I just saw? Charles froze, stammering incoherently. I stepped closer to Sabrina, my voice a low growl. I've seen everything. That video you thought I wouldn't know? You dared to play games in my own house? Sabrina bit her lip, her hand pressing against her cheek. Then slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes smooth and glacial. Mrs. Hale, she said softly, I only did my job. If your husband trusted me too much, that isn't my fault. Shut your mouth. I roared, jabbing my finger toward her face. I will not have someone like you in this house. Charles hurriedly cut in, his voice trembling. Victoria, please listen to my explanation first. I looked at my husband, my heart aching. The man who had once been my support had become the heaviest, most humiliating burden of my life. But in that moment, what made me angrier than anything was the flicker of a smile on Sabrina's lips, a haughty smile, as if she already held the winning hand. I clenched my fists. Another flame rose inside me, not only the pain of a betrayed wife, but the defiance of a leader, used to standing on the battlefield of business. I was about to rush forward again when a strong hand grasped my shoulder. Rebecca. She had run down the stairs and stood squarely between me and Sabrina. Mom, her voice was firm. If she leaves, the clip will be released immediately. I froze, my chest heaving with rage. Are you telling me I should tolerate this viper in my house any longer? Rebecca stared straight at me, eyes full of determination. Yes, we need to control the situation, not be forced into weakness. If you drive her away, we will lose everything. Charles tried to step forward, his voice cracking. Rebecca, you don't understand. But she turned sharply to him, her tone hard. I understand better than you think. I looked at my daughter and saw a sheaf of papers clutched in her hand. Rebecca held them out to me. Gregory paid her. These are the transfer receipts. I got them from Sabrina's computer. My eyes widened. The numbers and shady transactions were all there, unassailable. Sabrina stood motionless, her cheeks still marked with the red sting of my slap, but her gaze did not falter. She offered a faint smile and shrugged as if used to being exposed. Mrs. Hale, she said calmly, even if you have proof, that clip alone is enough to destroy your family. Are you sure you want to go that far? My body went stiff. I gripped the documents, locking my eyes onto her challenging stare. In that instant my anger did not subside, but reason began to return. Rebecca was right. One wrong move now would make everything collapse. I drew a slow, steady breath, then turned toward Sabrina, my voice low and cold as a blade. You will stay. But from now on, you are a prisoner in this house. I will turn this place into a cage, and there will be no escape for you. Silence fell like a shroud. Charles hung his head. Rebecca tightened her hold on my shoulder to steady me, and Sabrina. The smile on her lips vanished, replaced by a fleeting, trembling look. In that moment, I swore that the balance of this power game had officially shifted. The living room still carried the faint smell of wine and the sound of shattered glass. From that night, the next morning, Rebecca sat across from me, eyes sharp, voice decisive. We will turn this house into the trap itself. I looked at my daughter, my heart aching with a mixture of pride and pain. I had once wanted Rebecca to live a quiet life, but now she was the one leading me out of the mire. I nodded, swallowing the remaining anger and turning that pain into another flame. The determination not to let this family be buried. Rebecca spread papers across the table, a floor plan of the villa, the location of every room, and the blind spots where cameras could be placed. Mom, she thinks she holds the knife by the handle, but actually, we have the advantage. This is our territory. From now on, every step she takes, every breath will be under our watch. I nodded, my gaze hardening. Be careful, Rebecca. If she notices, everything will collapse. Rebecca smiled faintly, a look so like my younger self. Did you forget I'm a lawyer? I know what's legal and what's indisputable. At that moment the door opened. Michael Barrett entered, still the neat appearance of a longtime colleague. A dark suit, a leather briefcase in hand, eyes sharp but trustworthy. All evidence must be legalized. His voice rang out clearly. If we want to take Gregory Vaughn down on a legal chessboard, every piece of data, every recording must be indisputable. I stood and shook Michael's hand. I've been waiting for you. Gregory won't expect my family to be ready to strike back. Michael opened his case and pulled out compact devices, disguised audio recorders, mini cameras that could be hidden in a vase or picture frame. He set them on the table. The light caught them, making them gleam like weapons in a warrior's hands. We cannot let emotion take over. Mrs. Hale, I know how much this hurts you, but if we want to bring Gregory down, we need a thick dossier of evidence, clean, clear, and legally sound. I squeezed the edge of the table and drew a deep breath. I understand. From today, I am no longer merely a betrayed wife. I am the CEO, and I will coordinate this campaign as I would a billion-dollar deal. Rebecca gave a bitter, wry smile. Mom, there's nothing that can break you, even the greatest pain. In that moment, I saw my own reflection in my daughter, my blood, my reason, and the coldness I sometimes hated having to use. Rebecca spread a few more files across the table, pages crammed with numbers and bank notations. Her fingers skimmed quickly over each line, her voice decisive as if she were standing in a courtroom. Look, Mom, Gregory transferred money to Sabrina through a fake charitable fund. On the surface, it's a donation, but in reality, it's a payment. All the time stamps matched the occasions when Sabrina withdrew cash from the bank. I listened intently, blood boiling with anger. That bastard. He thinks he can buy off someone in our own house and no one will notice? Rebecca pressed her lips together and nodded. We must stay calm. This is enough to put Sabrina in court. But if we want to take down Gregory as well, we need more. Outside the study, Isabella was fiddling with the new camera she'd bought. She didn't care for conspiracies, but artists are always sensitive to odd atmospheres. She lifted the camera and tried a few shots down the hallway and in the library. At that moment, Isabella's lens caught Sabrina entering the library. She looked around cautiously, then pulled a thin stack of papers from her bag. She hurriedly photographed several pages from one of Charles's notebooks, then tucked them back as if she'd never touched them. Isabella frowned and snapped a few more frames. She didn't fully understand their significance, but her instincts told her this was something to record. After Sabrina left, Isabella ran upstairs to review the short clip. In the footage, There was clearly Sabrina bending over, a phone flashing in her hand, her face showing panic when she heard a sound in the hallway. When Rebecca watched the footage, the corner of her mouth lifted. Perfect. Not just the money now, we have images too. Sabrina can't deny this. I sat silently, staring at the documents and the video Isabella had captured by chance. Each piece was different, but they gradually fit together like fragments in a huge puzzle. Michael gave a small nod, his voice hoarse but resolute. We have enough now to tighten the noose. The issue now is timing. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her eyes blazing as if lit from within. We'll make her the prey inside her own house. From now on, every step she takes will turn into evidence against herself. I remained silent. The wound of a betrayed wife still bled inside me, but a cold smile flickered across my lips. I knew the game had begun to shift. That evening, rain poured heavily over the garden. I stood in the hallway, looking down into the living room where Charles sat silently, his head bowed, hands clenched tightly together. The light cast over his face made him look so exhausted and defeated that it took me a moment to recognize my own husband. I stepped in. Charles. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. Suddenly, Charles broke down, his voice choked with sobs. I was trapped. Victoria. It was all a trap. I froze, but immediately my anger surged back. I shouted, my voice rising above the sound of the rain. You betrayed me once, and now again. How long do you intend to humiliate me? Charles shook his head over and over, tears streaming down, his trembling hands gripping the edge of the chair. No, I didn't want this. That night, I was drunk. Sabrina came on to me. Then that video. Gregory has it all in his hands. Heat rushed to my face, my hands curling into fists. The images from that clip flashed vividly again, like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I screamed. You say you didn't want it, but why did you let it happen? Do you know what will happen to me if that clip is released? Do you know what will happen to my company? Charles lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. He only repeated one line. I was wrong. I was too weak. Suddenly, Rebecca stepped in. She stood between us, her voice firm but breaking with pain. Mom, this isn't just Dad's fault. This is a scheme. Gregory set the trap from the start. I turned to my daughter, tears still clinging to my eyes. You dare defend him? Rebecca shook her head, her voice trembling but steady. Not defend. I just want you to see clearly. Dad isn't only a betrayer. He's also a victim in Gregory and Sabrina's filthy game. For a moment, the entire room sank into the sound of rain pounding against the windows. I stood there, my heart tightening, torn between a mountain of resentment and my daughter's plea to hold on to some sliver of hope. But I couldn't forgive, not yet. No, not now. Charles buried his face in his hands, his muffled voice echoing in the room lit only by the weak yellow glow of a lamp. Gregory threatened. I didn't dare tell you. He said if I told anyone, the clip would go out immediately. Victoria. I was paralyzed with fear. I thought, if I stayed silent, everything could stay quiet. I stood there, my fists clenched so hard my knuckles turned white. Inside me, pain and humiliation still burned, but when my voice emerged, it was so cold it chilled even me. You were wrong, Charles. Silence saves nothing. It only drags us deeper. From now on, you will stand with us. If not, we lose everything. Charles lifted his head, his reddened eyes drowning in despair. He tried to speak, but his lips only trembled, releasing a few broken words. I'll do, as you say. Just please, don't leave me behind. I gave no reply. Instead, I turned toward the window, gazing out at the sheets of rain lashing the garden. Darkness from the storm blanketed everything. But inside me, another fire ignited the fire of battle. Not only for the company, but for the last shred of honor left in this family. Behind me, I heard Rebecca sigh. She stepped closer to Charles, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. But when her eyes lifted toward me, they blazed with a different kind of resolve. Rebecca was no longer just the daughter of this household, she was becoming a true ally. As Sabrina passed down the hallway, her familiar handbag in hand, Rebecca bent slightly as if to pick up something she had dropped. In that fleeting instant, her hand moved like lightning, slipping a tiny recording device into the outer pocket of Sabrina's bag. "Thank you," Sabrina murmured with a faint smile. Completely unaware, I watched from afar, silent. But in Rebecca's eyes, I caught the glimmer of light. We had just placed our first piece on Gregory's chessboard. 2 days later, the tiny recorder hidden in Sabrina's handbag proved its worth. Late at night, when she thought everyone was asleep, Sabrina pulled out her phone, stepped into the corner of the hallway near my study, and whispered, "The plan is going smoothly. Charles is completely in our hands. Victoria is starting to get suspicious, but she can't do much. Yes, don't worry, I'll keep playing this role until the very end." The name Gregory rang out clearly, followed by her cold, confident laugh. When Rebecca replayed the recording, she nearly leapt out of her chair. She looked at me, her eyes blazing like fire. "We've got her." We turned this over to the lawyer immediately. I held the device in my hand, emotions surging, part pain from betrayal, part the flicker of hope newly lit. For the first time in days of darkness, I felt Gregory had finally left a crack in his armor. We summoned Michael Barrett that very night. He arrived in his dark suit, briefcase in hand. When Rebecca hit play and the recording filled the room, Michael sat still, his usually calm face breaking into the faintest smile. "This is enough to shift the board," he said firmly. "Legally, this is clear evidence that Sabrina was acting under Gregory Vaughn's orders. No more vague speculation." I straightened my back, fingers laced together, my gaze no longer just that of a betrayed wife. In that moment, I was once again the CEO who had closed billion-dollar deals. Clear-headed, cold, calculating. "We'll keep the original and make 2 copies. One for the lawyer, one for you to safeguard. If Gregory dares release the clip, we'll release this." Michael nodded. "Exactly. But remember, this match won't end in a single day. He will strike back. We must move step by step patiently, as you would in a billion-dollar negotiation." Rebecca clasped my hand, her eyes full of determination. "Mom, we'll win. This time, I'll stand with you until the end." I looked at my daughter, and a surge of faith rose within me. Perhaps this cruel betrayal was the fire that tested gold. The moment I realized Rebecca had truly come into her own, not only a brilliant lawyer, but the heir to my strength. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp, quiet night. Inside, the study lit brightly against the darkness. I knew my family had just placed another piece on the board, and this time, the game had begun to turn. After Michael left, the room sank into silence. I stood by the desk, the warm yellow light spilling across stacks of files. Suddenly, a familiar feeling returned, the same one I'd had in the boardroom, facing rows of ruthless competitors. I drew a deep breath, turning to Rebecca and Charles. My voice dropped, steady and resolute. "We will lead this game, not Gregory, not Sabrina. From now on, every move will be in our hands." Rebecca nodded, her eyes alight. Charles lowered his head, his shoulders still trembling. Yet I caught a faint glimmer of resolve in his eyes, as though he finally understood. There was no more room to hide. Meanwhile, across the hallway, Sabrina had begun to sense something was wrong. Since yesterday, my gaze had shifted, not the gaze of a weak, betrayed wife, but of a cold, calculating overseer. Late that night, Sabrina locked herself in the bathroom and pulled out her phone. Her voice was barely more than a breath, yet it could not escape the hidden microphone near the vent. "Gregory, they suspect. Victoria is different. She's too quiet. I'm not sure I can control this anymore. I need clear instructions." Gregory's voice crackled through the speaker, low and sharp. "Stay calm. When the time is right, we'll release the clip. Before that, extract as much data from medical tech as you can. Understood. Sabrina bit her lip, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. I'll try, but I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. She had no idea another eye was already watching. Upstairs, Isabella was testing her new video camera. She had only meant to capture a few shots of the hallway for an art project, but when her lens swept across the study, it caught Sabrina at Charles's computer, hurriedly plugging in a USB and opening a file directory. Come on, hurry, Sabrina muttered, her trembling fingers clicking through, sending off several confidential files. Isabella's lens captured every moment, Sabrina's tense face, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes, the frantic press of the send button. When Isabella replayed the footage, her heart raced. She didn't fully grasp the value of the files, but she knew one thing for certain. Sabrina was hiding something extremely dangerous. She ran to find me in the middle of the night, and when I watched the recording, I exhaled slowly, my eyes flashing with a coldness that even I barely recognized. Thank you, Isabella. You've just given me another crucial piece. Outside, lightning split the sky, tearing through the darkness. Inside the villa, the game of power climbed to a higher level where every move Sabrina made was recorded, every piece of evidence tightening the noose around Gregory Vaughn. That night, rain hammered the roof, pouring down as if the entire dark sky had been emptied onto the villa. Thunder rolled and the wind howled through the halls. In that chaos, Sabrina quietly packed a small bag, hiding inside it the USB containing the documents she had just stolen. She breathed heavily and hurried down the stairs. Her high heels clicked loudly on the stone floor, echoing through the silent house. Rain and sweat blurred on her face, but Sabrina did not stop. I must get away, right now, she muttered, panic flashing in her eyes. The garage door appeared in the darkness, but as Sabrina rushed toward it, a figure stood blocking her path. Rebecca, wearing a thin robe, hair drenched and tangled from the storm, stared at her, eyes bright and unflinching. You're not going anywhere. Rebecca's voice rang out, cold as metal striking metal. Sabrina froze, clutching the bag. Rain splashed through the window, pooling on the stone floor and reflecting the image of two women facing each other, like warriors on a battlefield. Sabrina cried out, her voice raw with desperation. I'm a victim too. Gregory forced me. If I hadn't done it, he would have destroyed me. Rebecca didn't blink. She stepped forward, her tone firm. A victim. You could have refused from the start, but you chose money. You chose to betray this family. Don't expect me to be fooled by fake tears. Sabrina trembled, her fingers digging into the strap. Eyes red. You don't understand. I have no way out. Rebecca lifted her chin, shoulders stiff, eyes blazing in the dark. You locked your own way out, and today, you will not take anything out of this house. Outside, thunder cracked, rattling the garage windows. The two women stood face to face, one a desperate fugitive trying to escape, the other a young lawyer whose gaze was as sharp as a blade. The whole villa seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next moment. A thunderclap subsided as I stepped out from the hallway shadows and stood under the pale yellow garage light. My dark coat was speckled with rain. My voice rang out, cold as steel. You sold your soul, Sabrina. Don't blame anyone else. Sabrina startled and took a step back, eyes wide. Mrs. Hale, you don't understand. I had no choice. Gregory has everything. He'll kill me if I betray him. I stepped closer, my gaze fixed on her. No excuses. We all have choices. You chose money. You chose betrayal. Now you must pay. Rebecca remained planted at the exit, unmoving. Sabrina gasped for breath, fingers trembling as she tried to unzip the bag. Her eyes desperate like an animal cornered. Suddenly, from the garage entrance, Michael Barrett appeared. He walked forward calmly, without a word wasted. In an instant, his hand tore the USB from Sabrina's grip. It's over, Michael said firmly, his voice resolute. Sabrina froze. Her eyes locked on the USB in his hand. That tiny object, her fragile grip on power, was gone in a heartbeat. Her bag slipped from her grasp, thudding onto the wet floor. She collapsed to her knees in the puddles of rainwater, a choked sob escaping her lips before breaking into uncontrollable weeping. No, no, I never wanted this, she wailed, her hands covering her face, drenched hair clinging to her trembling shoulders. The vast garage echoed with her cries like the lament of a soul fallen into ruin. Rebecca stood in silence, while I watched from above, my heart stirring with both pity and an icy detachment. For I knew, from this moment on, Sabrina Cole had fallen completely, and the noose around Gregory Vaughn was tightening more than ever. That afternoon, Charles received a message of just 6 words. Come see me. Alone. He sat motionless in his chair, hands trembling as he gripped his phone. I stood behind him and read the words plainly. The fear in Charles's eyes resembled a trapped animal long caged, now summoned by its hunter. You know what you must do. Gregory Vaughn's voice echoed in Charles's head, as if the man were sitting in the room with him. That evening, Charles went to the hotel where Gregory had booked a private meeting room. Gregory was waiting, immaculately dressed in a black suit, a glass of red wine on the table casting a cold sheen. When Charles entered, Gregory smirked. Ah, you finally came. You know why I asked you here, don't you? Charles stammered, sweat beading on his brow. Gregory, I can't go on like this. Gregory slammed his hand on the table, his tone harsh. Don't pretend to be weak. You know what you must do. Transfer to me all the latest research reports from medical tech, or else. He switched on his laptop, the screen flaring, the cursor poised over a video file. The door to the room suddenly opened. Rebecca and I stepped in. We were both dressed in dark colors, our gazes sharp as blades. My voice rang out cold and steady, without a tremor. No, you are the one who will pay. Gregory froze for a split second, but quickly recovered his arrogance. He sneered, then turned the laptop toward us. Oh, Mrs. Hale, I've been waiting for this moment. You think you can control it? With one click. He emphasized each word. I'll release the clip right here. The screen revealed the blurry frame, Charles and Sabrina on the sofa. A wine glass spilled on the floor. Gregory placed his finger on the touchpad, his grin vicious and wide. The room felt suffocating. The yellow light cast across the glass table seemed to pick out every bead of sweat on Charles's forehead. I stood still, gripping the folder, my eyes fixed on Gregory. This confrontation was no longer a covert game. It was an open war, and I knew that a single misstep could reduce everything to smoke and ash. Gregory laughed, his finger sliding across the keyboard, ready to release the clip. The glow of the screen distorted his face into something twisted and cruel. In just a few seconds, the Hale family's honor will be in ruins, he hissed through his teeth. But before he could hit send, Rebecca stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. Pointless. A copy is already with the court. Our lawyer holds every recording, every receipt, every video of Sabrina reporting directly to you. If you dare release that clip, you'll destroy yourself first. Gregory froze, his hand hovering above the touchpad. His eyes darted wildly, and the arrogant confidence drained from his face in an instant. Impossible, he rasped, his voice cracked. I stepped closer, my tone cold as steel. You're not the only one who knows how to play with technology, Gregory. You underestimated this family. Gregory's hand trembled. At last, he slammed the laptop shut, the sharp clack echoing through the silent room. He looked up at me, sweat rolling down his forehead. The smirk on his lips warped now into a grimace of despair. At that moment, the back door burst open. Sabrina appeared, her face pale, her eyes swollen and red, but in them burned a new resolve. Gregory whipped around and barked. What are you doing just standing there? Get over here. But Sabrina didn't move. Instead, she lifted her chin, her voice trembling yet resounding through the room. He bought me. Everything I did was under Gregory Vaughn's orders. I have the receipts, the messages, and proof of every time he forced me. Gregory went rigid. His face drained of color. He lunged forward to silence her, but Michael and two bodyguards strode in, intercepting him before he could take a step closer. I watched it all unfold, my anger no longer the only fire inside me. This was the moment I knew. The man who had inflicted such agony on my family was finally being forced to face the truth spoken by his own ally. The air grew thick, the storm outside pounding against the glass windows, as if applauding the final act of Gregory Vaughn. That night, the villa lay silent after the rain. The yellow glow from the living room cast a soft light over a man kneeling on the carpet. Charles bowed his head, shoulders trembling, his voice breaking as though it might dissolve into tears. Please forgive me, Victoria. I'm begging you. I know what I've done. I know I've shamed you and this whole family. I stood before him, arms crossed tightly, my heart pounding. Everything that had happened, the video, the scheme, the betrayal came rushing back, choking my chest. I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. If not for the company, I would have thrown you out long ago. Charles, do you understand what you've done? You've turned me into a laughingstock, turned this family into prey for Gregory. Charles lifted his tear-filled eyes, his lips trembling. I know, I'm weak, Victoria, but I'll change. I swear, I won't let you suffer this pain again. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head, my voice hoarse from restraint. Change? Charles, this isn't the first time. After the last betrayal, you promised the same thing. And then, can a weak man truly change his nature? He shuffled closer, hands clutching at my coat, his voice desperate. Victoria, please believe me this time. If not for love, then for the family, for our children. I don't want to end my life in regret and guilt. I pressed my lips together, my heart aching and burning with rage at once. This man, the one who had built everything with me, was now kneeling like someone who had lost it all. Inside me, two voices clashed. The cold CEO who demanded discipline and honor, and the wife who still, somewhere, felt something. The room felt suffocating. I turned my face away, unwilling to let him see. My eyes start to blur. Suddenly, sobs echoed from the staircase. Rebecca rushed down, tears streaming down her face. She was no longer the composed lawyer, but a daughter trying to hold her family together. Mom, she choked out, kneeling beside Charles. Please give Dad a chance. I know he was wrong, but I also know he truly regrets it. If you cut him off now, we'll lose him forever. I turned away, my hands trembling, my nails digging into my skin. I was used to making huge decisions in the boardroom, signing billion-dollar contracts without hesitation. But now, my heart felt torn in two. On one side, I was the steel CEO, the woman who would never let a betrayer return. On the other, I was the wife who had walked with Charles through more than 30 years. The mother seeing despair in her daughter's eyes. I couldn't speak. Every time I looked at Charles kneeling, I saw the weak man who had hurt me, but also the man who had once held my hand. Through the hardest days of our early struggle, I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving only the scent of damp earth mixed with the faint fragrance of jasmine. Looking up at the sky, I saw a thin sliver of moon slip through the heavy clouds. A reminder that beyond darkness, there was still light. Inside, Rebecca's muffled sobs blended with Charles's ragged breaths. The whole villa sank into a heavy silence, a silence that stretched like a test of my endurance. I still had no answer, not yet forgiveness, not yet an ending. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a pale glow over the living room. The air was heavy after a night of tension. Charles sat across from me, eyes sunken, dark circles beneath them, his face gaunt. He spoke slowly, his voice hoarse but steadier than before. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making amends. No more excuses, Victoria. I've brought too much shame on you and on this family. But give me a path to redemption. I looked at him, my gaze cold, though my hands clenched unconsciously at the fabric of my blouse. Inside me, a storm still raged. Charles swallowed hard, then continued. We'll create a charitable foundation to give back to the community. I want to turn most of my wealth into something meaningful, build small hospitals in poor regions, fund scholarships for medical students, anything that can redeem me from the shadow Gregory cast over this family. I gave no reply. I only sat still, feeling my hands tremble on my knees. My whole life I had learned to control everything: the company, the employees, the deals, even my emotions. But now, that control felt like it was fracturing. Rebecca sat beside me, her eyes fixed on mine, as if silently pleading, "Mom, please listen." Yet she did not dare to speak aloud. The grandfather clock ticked dryly in the corner. In that space, I could hear every heavy breath Charles took. That man was no longer the strong partner who had walked with me through our early struggles. He was an old, broken figure, trembling as he begged for forgiveness. I closed my eyes, fighting to steady my heart, for I knew one decision would decide it all. Either grant him one final chance, or cut everything off forever, and I wasn't sure I was ready. Silence pressed down on the room. I don't know how much time passed, only the ticking of the clock, each beat striking my chest like a hammer. Then, Rebecca's voice broke through, soft, trembling, yet firm. "If Dad truly changes, it's a victory for us all. Not just for you, not just for me, but for him as well. Mom, haven't we always believed that people can rise again after their mistakes?" I turned to her, seeing her tear-streaked face. In it, I saw not only the reason of a lawyer, but also the tenderness of a daughter desperate to keep her family whole. My chest tightened painfully. For years I had held myself rigid, never allowing anyone to see me cry. But now, before Charles on his knees and Rebecca trembling in her plea, I broke down. Sobbing for the first time in many years, the tears broke free, not the frail sobs of weakness, but the shattering release of pain buried too long. Each drop fell against my blouse like it was melting away the layers of ice around my heart. Charles lifted his head, his eyes wide with disbelief, then reddened with tears of his own. He reached out a trembling hand toward me, but stopped halfway, as if afraid the touch would make me take my words back. I drew a deep breath, fixing my gaze on him. In my eyes now there was not only anger, but also a fragile glimmer of trust. "This is your last chance," I said, my voice hoarse but unmistakably firm. The air seemed to freeze. Charles shook violently, then collapsed onto the floor, sobbing openly. Rebecca wrapped her arms around me, crying hard, while I sat there hurting, relieved, and terrified all at once. For I knew, once I granted this chance, there would never be another. That morning, soft sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the living room. The wide space, once cold and distant, no longer felt empty. Charles, Rebecca, and I sat together on the gray sofa, silent for a long while, as if trying to find a shared rhythm of breath again. I looked down at my hands that had signed thousands of contracts, held so much power, and yet today, they trembled as I prepared to speak words that would decide the course of my marriage at last. I raised my head, locking eyes with Charles. My voice dropped low, firm but steady. "I forgive you, but only once. Charles, do you understand me?" In that instant, his eyes shattered with relief. Charles collapsed forward, sobs breaking free, shaking like a child. He clasped my hand, his rough fingers pressing against my cold palm. "Victoria, thank you. I will never forget this moment. I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve this forgiveness." Rebecca quietly placed her hand over ours. 3 hands clasped together, a small circle in the middle of a vast room. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at me, then at her father, and smiled softly through the tears. At last, our family is sitting together again. I tilted my head, feeling the warmth of my daughter's hand. A fragile relief seeped into my chest, as if after all the storms, the locked door in my heart had cracked open to let in a sliver of light. Charles was still crying, but there was no humiliation in his tears, now only gratitude, deep and overwhelming. He gripped my hand and Rebecca's as if letting go would make everything shatter again. For the first time in weeks, I felt I could breathe fully. Rebecca wiped her tears and let out a small, relieved smile. That smile softened the air in the room, sweeping away the shadows that lingered. She no longer carried the heavy gaze of a lawyer shouldering burdens. She was simply a daughter, happy to see her parents still side by side. "I've waited so long for this moment," she whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at my daughter, then at Charles. Though scars still lingered in my heart, I knew this choice had brought something right. Slowly, warmth returned to our home. We sat closer, the invisible wall between us fading. Charles shared little memories. Rebecca chimed in now and then, and I, though not ready to laugh aloud, felt my lips curve gently in a rare peace. Outside the window, the sky brightened. The first rays of morning slipped through the tall glass panes, spreading warmth across the room. Golden light washed over the three of us, sanctifying the circle of hands held tight in that moment. We embraced each other firmly, as if to mend every fracture of the past. The dawn streamed through the window, illuminating our embrace, a testament that no matter how fierce the storm, a new morning of hope could still rise. In the weeks that followed, I began to see real change in Charles. The man who had once been weak, living in comfort and fear, now threw himself into work he had never considered before. He spent mornings at community centers, helping the unemployed search for jobs. On weekends, he joined Rebecca in free legal aid programs for struggling families. One afternoon, I watched from the window as he spoke with young medical students, sharing his financial expertise and explaining how to raise funds for scholarships. He was no longer the man collapsed in shame, but someone striving to rebuild his worth. At my desk, I opened an old notebook and quietly wrote down 4 words: betrayal, conspiracy, forgiveness, healing. That was the journey of my family, a path paved with blood and tears, but also proof of the unbreakable strength of love and will. Rebecca had changed too. My daughter had always been rational, but after the ordeal, she grew into something more, understanding both justice and family. One evening, as we brewed tea together, she spoke softly. "Mom, I used to think justice only lived in the courtroom, but I've realized justice also lives in the heart. When we forgive at the right time, that too is justice." I looked at her, my chest swelling with a pride I could hardly put into words. She was not only a talented lawyer, but a woman who could see beyond written law to the laws of life. The villa, once shrouded in darkness, was transformed. Laughter and conversation returned, no longer drowned in gloom. And yet, inside me, I knew the scars would not vanish. They would remain, reminders of what we had endured and why we must hold on to one another. Not only Charles and Rebecca changed, Nathan and Isabella to found their own lessons. Nathan, who had always been consumed by his work in the city, returned this time with a different look in his eyes. Over dinner, he said to me, "I used to think family was just a place to stop by. But after everything, I understand. Without family as the root, success out there means nothing." Isabella sat by the piano, pressing a few soft keys, her voice quiet and thoughtful. "I've filmed so many clips of us, but the most precious one is the moment we sat together again. I think forgiveness is the most beautiful scene." I listened, my heart softening. My children, each in their own way, had grown wiser after the storm. Perhaps this fall had taught us more than any triumph ever could. One afternoon, I sat in the garden as the cool wind rustled through the trees. In that stillness, I realized the greatest strength is rising after ruin. Not wealth, not power, but the ability to mend broken pieces and turn them into a stronger foundation for tomorrow. I lifted my head, gazing into the open air as if someone unseen was listening. My voice rang out, slow but steady. If it were you, would you forgive a second time? The question lingered in the air, not demanding an answer, for I knew each listener, each witness to this story, would find their own reply within their heart. The sunset fell, washing the roof, the garden, and all of us in warm gold a family once shattered, now learning how to move forward. My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts or your own experiences. And don't forget to subscribe, so we can continue to listen, to tell, and to live through stories together, stories that may be yours, or perhaps someone you once knew.